The rain poured down in relentless sheets, turning the dense forest into a symphony of dripping leaves and squelching mud. Somewhere deep within this labyrinth of towering trees stood a small wooden cabin barely visible through the haze of misty air. It was here that Arlen, an aging but hearty woodsman with calloused hands and a heart softened by solitude, found himself startled one evening by an unusual sight. As he stoked the fire inside his humble abode, trying to fend off the chill seeping through the cracks between logs, there came a frantic knock at the door, a sound so urgent it made him jump. Opening it revealed not another traveler or lost hiker as he might have expected, but two figures unlike anything he'd ever seen before. One was tall and angular, its skin shimmering faintly like wet opals under the dim light from his lantern. The other figure cradled in its arms was smaller, frail, and eerily still, clearly struggling for breath. "My daughter is dying, human!" the alien mother cried out, her voice trembling with desperation. "Please, save her." Arlen blinked several times, unsure if exhaustion had finally caught up with him. But no, they were real, their presence undeniable despite their otherworldly appearance. He stepped aside without hesitation, gesturing them inside. There wasn't much room in his little cabin, but what space existed now brimmed with tension and urgency. "Quickly," Arlen said, motioning toward the cot near the fireplace. "Lay her there." The alien mother moved swiftly, placing her child on the makeshift bed with surprising tenderness given her earlier panic. Her elongated fingers brushed against the girl's forehead, which glowed faintly blue, an eerie contrast to her pale, translucent skin. She turned back to Arlen, her large eyes shimmering with unshed tears. "She needs help. I don't know your medicines, your ways. Please." Arlen scratched his beard thoughtfully, taking stock of the situation. He wasn't a doctor, just a man who knew how to survive in the wilderness. But something about the raw emotion in her plea struck a chord deep within him. Perhaps it was because he understood loss all too well. Years ago, he'd buried his wife during a harsh winter, leaving him alone in these woods ever since. That pain lingered, buried beneath layers of routine and isolation, but seeing this stranger beg for her child's life stirred memories he'd long tried to forget. "I'll do what I can," he muttered gruffly, grabbing a tattered medical kit from beneath the counter. Inside were bandages, antiseptics, and various herbs he'd collected over the years. They weren't advanced tools, but they'd kept him alive more times than he could count. The alien mother watched him intently, her posture rigid as though she feared moving even slightly would worsen her daughter's condition. Every movement Arlen made seemed magnified in her gaze, each rustle of fabric or clink of metal drawing sharp inhalations from her. Finally, unable to bear the silence any longer, she spoke again. "My name is Vela," she said softly. "And this is Lyra." Arlen paused mid-motion, looking up at her. For a moment, he simply stared, then nodded slowly. "I'm Arlen," he replied. "Now tell me everything you can about what's wrong with Lyra." Vela hesitated, her luminous eyes flickering with uncertainty. "It's difficult to explain. Our kind are not meant to endure such environments as yours. Your atmosphere, it weakens us. And Lyra—" her voice cracked, betraying the strain she'd been holding back. "Lyra is young. Too young to fight it." Arlen frowned, processing this information. He didn't fully understand what she meant by your atmosphere, but he trusted his instincts enough to believe her. If their physiology reacted poorly to Earth's environment, perhaps warmth and rest could buy them some time while he figured out a solution. He began wrapping Lyra's tiny form in blankets, ensuring she stayed warm. As he worked, he couldn't help but notice how delicate she looked, almost ethereal compared to her mother's more robust frame. Her features were softer, less defined, as though she were still growing into her true self. Despite their obvious differences, there was something universally familiar about the scene, a parent fighting desperately to keep their child alive. "So why come here?" Arlen asked after a while, breaking the heavy silence. "Why risk coming to Earth if it's so dangerous for you?" Vela sighed deeply, her shoulders sagging as though burdened by more than just physical fatigue. "We had no choice. Our people, we're refugees. Hunted. Pursued across stars by those who wished to destroy us." She glanced sharply at Arlen, searching his face for judgment. "When none came," she continued, We fled to your world hoping to find sanctuary, somewhere remote where we could hide until we regained strength. But Lyra fell ill en route. By the time we landed, she was already fading. Refugees. The word echoed in Arlen's mind, stirring old memories of stories he'd heard about wars fought far beyond human comprehension. Wars among the stars sounded like tales spun by storytellers around campfires, yet here stood living proof that such conflicts existed, and spilled over onto unsuspecting worlds like his own. "What will happen if you're caught?" he asked quietly, dabbing Lyra's forehead with a damp cloth infused with soothing herbs. Vela's expression darkened. "Death," she whispered. "For all of us." Arlen swallowed hard, feeling the weight of her words settle heavily upon him. This wasn't just about saving one child anymore, it was about protecting lives hunted by forces unknown. And somehow, inexplicably, fate had dropped this responsibility squarely into his lap. Outside, thunder rolled ominously, punctuating the gravity of their predicament. Rain hammered against the roof, threatening to drown out the quiet rhythm of Lyra's labored breathing. Arlen glanced toward the window, half expecting shadowy figures to emerge from the storm, drawn by some unseen signal. But the forest remained eerily empty, save for the occasional flash of lightning illuminating gnarled branches reaching skyward like skeletal hands. "You said we," Arlen noted suddenly, turning back to Vela. "Are there others? More of your kind nearby?" Vela hesitated, clearly weighing whether to trust him further. After a tense moment, she nodded. "Yes. A small group. We separated when we realized Lyra needed immediate care. They're waiting, hiding close by, but not too close. Not yet." Arlen rubbed his temples, feeling the beginnings of a headache forming. This was spiraling far beyond anything he'd anticipated when opening his door earlier tonight. Refugees, hunters, dying children. It was all too much for one man to handle alone. Yet as he looked down at Lyra's fragile form, he knew he couldn't turn away. "All right," he said firmly, straightening up. "Here's what we're going to do." Over the next hour, Arlen worked tirelessly, employing every bit of knowledge he possessed to stabilize Lyra's condition. He brewed a concoction of herbs known for their restorative properties, crushing leaves and roots with practiced hands before steeping them in hot water. The steam carried an earthy aroma that filled the cabin, mingling with the dampness brought in by the storm. Vela watched him intently, her shimmering eyes reflecting both hope and despair. "This may help," Arlen said, holding out a small cup of the herbal tea. "It's not a cure, but it might ease her discomfort." Vela hesitated, her fingers hovering over the cup. "Will it harm her?" she asked, her voice tinged with caution. Arlen shook his head. "No. These plants are safe, even humans use them. But I can't promise miracles." With a deep breath, Vela accepted the cup and gently coaxed Lyra to sip from it. The child stirred faintly, her glowing skin flickering like candlelight caught in a draught. For a moment, there was silence save for the rhythmic patter of rain against the roof. Then, slowly, Lyra's breathing seemed to steady, if only slightly. Arlen leaned back on his heels, exhaling heavily. "That's something, at least." Vela placed a hand on Lyra's chest, her touch feather-light. Her gaze softened, though worry still lingered in the corners of her luminous eyes. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the storm outside. "You've done more than anyone else would have." Arlen grunted noncommittally, though a flicker of pride warmed his chest. Helping others wasn't new to him. He'd patched up injured animals and even nursed a few stranded hikers back to health over the years, but this felt different. This wasn't just about survival. It was about trust, connection, and perhaps even redemption for the loneliness that had defined his life since losing his wife. The sound of thunder crashing overhead startled them both. Vela flinched, her body tensing as if expecting danger to burst through the door at any moment. Arlen noticed her reaction and frowned. "You're afraid," he observed. "But not just of the storm, are you?" Vela hesitated, then nodded. "They could be close. Those who hunt us, they don't stop. Not until they've found what they seek." "Who are they?" Arlen pressed, leaning forward. "If I'm going to help you, I need to know everything." Vela sighed, her shoulders sagging under the weight of unspoken fears. They call themselves the HFY, a merciless faction bent on eradicating our kind. We were once part of their empire, a peaceful people living among the stars. But when we refused to join their wars, they turned on us. Now, we are hunted like prey. Her words sent a chill down Arlen's spine. Wars among the stars suddenly didn't seem so far-fetched. He imagined vast fleets of ships cutting through the void, weapons blazing, entire civilizations reduced to ash. And now, somehow, this conflict had spilled into his quiet corner of the world. "What makes you think they'll find you here?" he asked, glancing toward the window again. The forest beyond remained shrouded in darkness, its secrets hidden beneath layers of rain and mist. "They track energy signatures," Vela explained. "Our ships emit traces even after landing. Without proper shielding, we leave trails wherever we go. That's why we split up, to confuse them. But time is running out. If they discover us—" She didn't finish the sentence, but she didn't need to. Arlen understood all too well what was at stake. He stood abruptly, pacing the cramped space of the cabin as his mind raced. "All right," he said finally, stopping near the hearth. "Here's the plan. First, we keep Lyra stable. Second, we figure out how to mask whatever signal your ship is giving off. Third," he paused, looking directly at Vela, "we prepare for a fight." Vela blinked, clearly taken aback. "A fight? Against the HFY? Human, you don't understand. They're relentless. Their technology far surpasses anything you've ever seen. And yet here you are asking me for help," Arlen shot back, his tone firm but not unkind. "I may not have fancy gadgets or starships, but I know these woods better than anyone. If they come looking, we'll make damn sure they regret stepping foot in my forest." For the first time since arriving, Vela smiled, a faint, weary curve of her lips that spoke volumes. "You're either very brave or very foolish, Arlen." "Maybe both," he replied with a shrug. "Either way, I'm not letting them take you or Lyra without a fight." As the night wore on, Arlen set to work fortifying the cabin. He retrieved traps and snares from his storage shed, setting them around the perimeter to deter intruders, human or otherwise. Meanwhile, Vela tended to Lyra, whispering softly in a language Arlen couldn't understand. It sounded melodic, almost like song, and he found himself pausing occasionally to listen, captivated by its beauty. By dawn, the rain had slowed to a drizzle, though the air remained heavy with moisture. Exhaustion tugged at Arlen's eyelids, but he forced himself to stay alert. Every snap of a twig or rustle of leaves outside sent his heart racing, convinced that the HFY were closing in. Yet each time, it turned out to be nothing more than the forest waking up alongside him. When sunlight finally broke through the clouds, casting golden beams across the wet landscape, Arlen stepped outside to survey his handiwork. The traps were invisible to the untrained eye, cleverly concealed beneath fallen leaves and moss. He nodded approvingly, satisfied that they'd buy some time if trouble came knocking. Back inside, Vela was sitting beside Lyra, her expression pensive. When Arlen entered, she looked up, her shimmering eyes meeting his. "She's stronger today," Vela said, a note of cautious optimism in her voice. "Your medicine, it helped." Arlen allowed himself a brief smile. "Good. That buys us more time." But Vela's relief was short-lived. She glanced toward the window, her brow furrowing. "Still, we can't stay here forever. Sooner or later, they'll find us." Arlen crossed the room and crouched beside her, resting a hand on her shoulder. "Then we'll deal with them when they come. One step at a time, all right." Vela nodded, though doubt lingered in her gaze. Outside, birds began chirping, their songs cutting through the lingering gloom of the storm. It was a reminder that life persisted, even in the face of chaos, and perhaps, just perhaps, they stood a chance. Unbeknownst to them, however, high above the dense canopy of trees, a sleek metallic craft hovered silently. Its sensors scanned the area below, detecting faint traces of energy emanating from somewhere within the forest. On board, shadowy figures studied the readings, their expressions cold and calculating. "They're here," one of them said, his voice devoid of emotion. "Prepare the strike team." The ship descended lower, vanishing behind the thick veil of clouds. Somewhere deep within the forest, a predator had locked onto its prey, and the chase was about to begin. As the alien craft descended silently above the forest, its sleek form blending seamlessly with the gray skies, Arlen was busy inspecting his traps. He moved methodically through the trees, ensuring each snare was taut and hidden from view. The woods were quiet now, save for the occasional drip of water falling from leaves and the distant call of a bird waking to greet the day. But Arlen's instincts screamed that something wasn't right. The stillness felt unnatural, like the calm before a storm. Back at the cabin, Vela sat cross-legged beside Lyra, her hands hovering over the child's body in slow, deliberate motions. Her fingers emitted faint pulses of light, weaving an intricate pattern in the air as she whispered words in her melodic tongue. Whatever ritual she performed seemed to soothe Lyra. The girl's breathing grew steadier, her once dim glow brightening slightly. Yet even as hope flickered within Vela, her sharp ears caught the subtle hum of engines far above. "They're coming," she murmured under her breath, her voice tight with dread. Arlen returned moments later, his boots squelching in the mud as he stepped inside. He froze when he saw Vela's expression. "What is it?" he asked, dropping the coil of rope he'd been carrying. "They've found us," she said simply, rising to her feet. "The HFY. How do you know?" Arlen demanded, already moving toward the window. He pushed aside the curtain just enough to peer out but saw nothing unusual, only the endless expanse of rain-soaked trees. "I can feel it," Vela replied, her shimmering skin taking on a faint bluish hue. "Their ships give off vibrations. Frequencies we can sense. They're close." Arlen cursed under his breath. "All right, here's what we're going to do. Grab whatever you need, food, supplies, and get ready to move. We'll head deeper into the forest where the terrain will work in our favor." Vela hesitated, glancing down at Lyra. The child had begun to stir again, her small hand twitching against the blanket. "She's too weak to travel," Vela protested. "If we leave now, she won't survive." "Then we stay and fight," Arlen said firmly, though his jaw clenched at the thought. "I didn't set those traps for nothing." Before Vela could respond, the unmistakable whine of descending engines shattered the silence. Both turned toward the sound, watching as a shadow passed over the cabin, blotting out the pale morning light. Through the window, they glimpsed the underside of a massive ship, its surface gleaming like polished obsidian. It hovered momentarily before touching down in a clearing just beyond the tree line, a monstrous predator poised to strike. "We don't have much time," Arlen muttered, grabbing his rifle from the corner. "Stay here with Lyra. Don't make a sound unless I tell you otherwise." "No," Vela said sharply, stepping forward. "You underestimate them. Their weapons are unlike anything you've ever faced. If you go out there alone, you'll die. And if I don't, they'll tear this place apart looking for you," Arlen shot back. "I'm not letting that happen." For a moment, their gazes locked in silent defiance. Then Vela relented, nodding reluctantly. "Fine. But take this." She reached into a pouch at her side and pulled out a small crystalline device no larger than a pebble. Its surface shimmered with iridescent colors, shifting like oil on water. "What is it?" Arlen asked, turning the object over in his palm. "A disruptor," Vela explained. "It won't stop them entirely, but it can interfere with their targeting systems. Use it wisely. It's all I have left." Arlen pocketed the crystal without another word and slipped out the door, vanishing into the dense foliage. Vela watched him go, her heart pounding in her chest. She wanted to follow, to protect her daughter by any means necessary, but she knew Lyra needed her more. Instead, she knelt beside the cot, placing a trembling hand on her child's forehead. "Hold on, my little star," she whispered. "Just a little longer." Outside, Arlen moved swiftly and silently, his years of living in the forest making him nearly invisible among the trees. He reached the edge of the clearing just as the HFY began disembarking from their ship. What he saw made his blood run cold. The invaders were tall and angular, their bodies encased in black armor that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. Their faces were obscured behind featureless masks, giving them an eerie, mechanical appearance. In their hands, they carried weapons unlike anything Arlen had ever seen. Long, sleek rifles that hummed with latent energy. He crouched low behind a fallen log, his grip tightening on his own rifle. It suddenly felt woefully inadequate compared to the advanced technology arrayed before him. Still, he reminded himself of what he did have: knowledge of the terrain, surprise on his side, and sheer determination. The first trap sprang as one of the KRL ventured too close to a snare line. A weighted net erupted from the ground, tangling around the figure and sending it crashing to the earth. Its comrades reacted instantly, raising their weapons and scanning the area with practiced precision. Arlen waited until their attention was fully focused on freeing the trapped soldier before making his move. He lobbed a makeshift smoke bomb, a concoction of powdered herbs and resin he'd prepared earlier, into the clearing. Thick, acrid smoke billowed outward, obscuring everything in its path. The KRL stumbled back, momentarily disoriented. Now was his chance. Arlen darted forward, firing his rifle at the nearest enemy. The bullet struck true, piercing the alien's armor and eliciting a sharp hiss of pain. Another followed suit, diving for cover while returning fire with bursts of searing blue energy. Arlen dove behind a tree just in time to avoid being hit, feeling the heat of the blast singe the bark inches from his face. "Damn it," he muttered, reloading quickly. This wasn't going to be easy. From somewhere deeper in the forest, a low rumble echoed, a sound both familiar and strange. Arlen paused, recognizing it immediately. The old bear den he'd encountered during his hunting trips. If the KRL disturbed it. Sure enough, a deafening roar split the air as a massive grizzly emerged from the shadows, enraged by the commotion. The beast charged straight into the fray, swiping at the nearest KRL with claws that tore through armor like paper. Chaos erupted as the soldiers scrambled to regroup, their disciplined formation crumbling under the unexpected assault. Seizing the opportunity, Arlen activated the disruptor Crystal Vela had given him. A pulse of light radiated outward, causing the KRL's weapons to sputter and fail mid-shot. One of them shouted orders in a guttural language, pointing toward the cabin. Arlen realized with a sinking feeling that reinforcements must already be en route. He couldn't hold them off forever, not alone. As much as it pained him to admit it, he needed help. Retreating back toward the cabin, Arlen fired off a few more shots to keep the KRL pinned down. When he burst through the door, Vela was waiting, her eyes wide with alarm. "They're coming," he gasped, slamming the door shut behind him. "We need to move. Now." Vela nodded grimly, scooping Lyra into her arms. Together, they fled into the depths of the forest, leaving the cabin, and the battle raging behind them, farther and farther behind. But the KRL were relentless. And they were closing in fast. The forest became a blur of motion as Arlen and Vela pushed forward, Lyra cradled protectively in her mother's arms. The rain had returned with renewed vigor, soaking them to the bone and turning the ground into treacherous mud. Each step was a struggle, but they dared not slow down. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit echoed, shouts in an alien tongue, the crunch of boots on wet leaves, and the occasional crackle of energy weapons slicing through the air. Arlen led the way, his knowledge of the terrain guiding their path. He steered them toward a narrow ravine he knew well, its steep walls offering some semblance of cover. As they reached it, he gestured for Vela to follow closely, helping her navigate the slippery descent. Once at the bottom, they pressed themselves against the damp stone, catching their breath while listening intently for signs of their pursuers. "They're getting closer," Vela whispered, her voice trembling despite her efforts to stay calm. She glanced down at Lyra, whose glow had dimmed alarmingly. "We can't keep running like this." "I know," Arlen replied grimly, scanning the area above. His mind raced, searching for any advantage they could exploit. Then inspiration struck, a memory from years ago when he'd stumbled upon an old mining tunnel hidden deep within the ravine. It wasn't much, but it might buy them time. "Follow me," he said urgently, leading them further along the ravine until they came upon a jagged opening partially concealed by overgrown vines. Without hesitation, he ducked inside, beckoning Vela to do the same. The tunnel was dark and narrow, its damp walls slick with condensation. They moved cautiously, guided only by the faint luminescence emanating from Lyra's fragile form. After what felt like an eternity, the passage widened into a small cavern. Here, Arlen stopped, turning to face Vela. "This should hold them off for a bit," he said, his voice steadier now. "But we need more than just hiding places if we're going to survive this." Vela nodded, lowering herself carefully onto the cold floor. She laid Lyra gently beside her, brushing strands of silvery hair away from the child's face. "There has to be another way," she murmured, desperation creeping into her tone. "If only I hadn't lost our communication device during the crash." Her words trailed off, but Arlen caught the hint of regret beneath them. An idea began forming in his mind, an audacious plan that relied heavily on both luck and courage. "Wait here," he instructed, already moving back toward the entrance of the cavern. "I'll draw them away and create enough noise to mask your escape." "No," Vela protested, rising to her feet. "You'll be killed." "It's the only chance you've got," Arlen countered firmly. "Trust me, I've lived in these woods my whole life. I know how to disappear when I need to." Before Vela could argue further, Arlen slipped out of the cavern and vanished into the shadows. Moments later, loud crashing noises erupted outside, accompanied by shouts and bursts of energy fire. The HFY took the bait, rushing toward the commotion with ruthless efficiency. Inside the cavern, Vela clutched Lyra tightly, tears streaming down her shimmering cheeks. She whispered prayers in her native tongue, praying for Arlen's safety even as she prepared herself for whatever came next. Meanwhile, Arlen executed his diversion with practiced skill. Using every trick he'd learned from years of hunting and survival, he lured the HFY deeper into the forest, leading them on a wild chase through dense thickets and across treacherous streams. Their advanced technology proved less effective in such rugged terrain, forcing them to rely on brute force rather than precision. Eventually, Arlen found himself cornered near the edge of a cliff overlooking a roaring waterfall. Below, the river churned violently, its waters frothing white against jagged rocks. There was nowhere left to run, but that was exactly what Arlen had planned. As the HFY closed in, weapons raised, Arlen smirked defiantly. "You want me?" he taunted, spreading his arms wide. "Come and get me." Without waiting for a response, he leapt off the edge, disappearing into the churning waters below. The HFY hesitated momentarily before firing blindly into the abyss, their shots ricocheting harmlessly off the rock face. When they finally descended to investigate, there was no sign of him. Back in the cavern, Vela waited anxiously, straining her ears for any sound of approaching enemies. Time seemed to stretch endlessly, each second heavier than the last. Just as despair threatened to overwhelm her, a faint hum filled the air, a sound she recognized instantly. "Our ship!" she exclaimed, clutching Lyra closer. Through sheer willpower, she managed to carry her daughter back toward the ravine, where a battered but functional vessel hovered silently above the ground. Its engines sputtered weakly, damaged but operational thanks to Arlen's earlier sabotage efforts. Vela climbed aboard, setting Lyra gently onto one of the seats. Her hands flew over the controls, initiating emergency protocols designed to stabilize the craft's systems. Outside, the distant rumble of the HFY's reinforcements grew louder. They were running out of time. Suddenly, a familiar figure emerged from the trees below, drenched and battered but unmistakably alive. Arlen waved frantically, shouting up at the ship. "Go! Get out of here!" Vela hesitated, torn between gratitude and guilt. But Lyra stirred weakly, her glowing eyes fluttering open. For the first time in days, she smiled, a tiny, hopeful gesture that broke Vela's heart. With trembling fingers, Vela activated the ship's thrusters. As the vessel ascended, she leaned out of the hatch, calling down to Arlen. "Thank you," she cried, her voice breaking. "For everything." Arlen grinned despite his exhaustion, giving her a thumbs up before stepping back into the shelter of the trees. Above him, the ship disappeared into the clouds, leaving behind only the echo of its departure. Weeks later, Arlen sat by the fire in his cabin, nursing a cup of tea. The storm had passed, and the forest was alive with birdsong once more. Life had returned to its usual rhythm, or so it seemed. One evening, as he tended to his traps, he noticed something unusual lying near the edge of the clearing, a small crystalline object, glowing faintly in the twilight. Picking it up, he recognized it immediately. It was another disruptor crystal, identical to the one Vela had given him. Attached to it was a note written in elegant, flowing script. To our friend among the stars, may your kindness never go unrewarded. We are safe because of you. Arlen smiled softly, tucking the crystal into his pocket. Somewhere far beyond the reaches of Earth, Lyra and Vela were safe. And perhaps, just perhaps, humanity had earned a new ally among the stars. And though the forest remained quiet once more, Arlen couldn't shake the feeling that his world had grown just a little brighter.